Today's episode is brought to us by Peter David. If you don't happen to recognize that name, that's fine. He's been a writer for a number of things in science fiction for a number of years. The stuff I tend to remember him most from personally is actually his Star Trek novels. The man's done a lot of stuff. And I mentioned that right off the bat because when I started watching the episode, I kind of tilted my head and I was like, this writing style seems familiar. After a while, you kind of get a feel for different writers' style of dialogue and how they approach transitions and cutscenes and whatnot. And I got to about to the point where we were about 10 or 20 minutes into the episode. I'm like, this really seems familiar. And I finally just paused the episode, looked up, and it sure enough, it's Peter David. And I was like, aha! I couldn't quite put the finger on it until I looked it up. But the whole time, I'm like, it seems so familiar. One little anecdote I found from Peter David while I was looking into this. Originally, they were going to go ahead and call the name of this episode Pestilence, Famine, and Death. He is actually... So that was in a previous episode where Londo referred to his wives as Pestilence, Famine, and Death. With Timov being Death. Now, the irony there, the joke there that Peter David was deliberately trying to accentuate is the fact that Londo is therefore war. Anywho, I'm going to talk about my big point last. So, Delenn, let's talk about the big point first. Usually I do my big point last, but in this case, the big point is the point that emphasizes the whole episode. So I want to talk about it first, just to mix things up. There's no threat of the week this episode. Not really. The issue with Stoner is not really a big, station's in trouble. And the issue with the assassination is very much not your typical, ship is under attack, station is under attack kind of a plotline. There's no bad guy of the week in the strictest sense of the word, even though there are actually 3 bad guys in this particular episode, when you think about it. And I like that. This is something I've talked about several times over on my Voyager videos, how much I feel that the adherence to the bad guy of the week, threat of the week, A-plot formula is unnecessary. Not that I'm against there being a threat, in a given week, but I think that the adherence to that model, the fact that there has to be some kind of threat every week is something that is detrimental to the overall writing process. Episodes like this episode, I therefore just eat up. Because this is a character episode. This is all about fleshing out the characters involved. A little bit of Talia Winters, a little bit of Garibaldi, a little bit of Delenn, and of course, Londo. And actually we get a decent amount of characterization for Timov throughout this episode too, which I found interesting. And a wee bit of development for Stoner as well. And I'd just like to say huge props to the actings team. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the gentleman who played Timov, you've actually probably seen him before. He's played several roles over the year, the person who played Stoner, you've seen him in several roles over the year. I didn't recognize the actress who played Timov, but she did the job perfectly. The two characters wonderfully contrast each other. It's a brilliant way to present it. Here we have someone who is being presented as a harpy of a woman. Someone you would hate to be, it's almost your stereotypical bad marriage wife situation, right, with Timov. And yet in every way, she is presented as better than someone who is actually slimy and disgusting and creepy and horrible, like Stoner is. Stoner is consistently portrayed as a massive creep. Someone who just is really horrible of a person. I'm reminded of an episode of Stargate Atlantis. Forgive me for not knowing the name. I'm not that great at Stargate. But I remember this episode distinctly because it actually disgusted me. I can't think of the name of the actor either. In the episode, no big spoilers here, it's not an ARC episode. In the episode, there's a gentleman on a world who is... basically naturally exudes something that makes people adore him and therefore be willing to do whatever he wants. And he uses that to the full extent you would imagine. And it's pretty horrible. But the whole point is there's a character analysis thing that can be done in many works of fiction and in real life. It's usually referred to as what you are when you're alone in the dark. But what it really means is what you're willing to do when there are no consequences. Forgive me for massively segueing here, but I think this is relevant to this episode in particular, so. I have said for many, 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 many years that power does not corrupt. I adamantly disagree with that statement. I have basically my whole life, ever since I first started studying the subject, studying history, studying politics, back when I was a kid in school. And I've always disagreed with that idea that power corrupts. I have always said that power enables. That and I've actually heard another person somewhat recently who said that power attracts the corruptible. Which is a similar concept. The idea here is that what power usually does to a person is it removes some of the consequences. In other words, what would you do, really, if consequence was taken away from the equation? Now, I am a huge idealist, and I firmly believe that most people would not degenerate into raving, terrible, horrible people if consequence was removed from their lives. I do not think people need the reality of consequence in order to be not horrible, slaving, disgusting, terrible people. That's my ideology. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I have no idea and no way of proving it. However, there are people, and this is factually provable, that when consequence is removed, are terrible human beings. And that's what we see in this episode with Stoner. That's what we saw with, I forget his name, back in the Stargate Atlantis episode. We see someone who can just get away with stuff. And he does. And he just gets away with things. He just goes ahead and says, yep. And he is a complete smarmy asshole about it the whole time. Because he knows there's nothing you can do about it. And he rubs it in your face constantly. And he is just, you can feel the ooze dripping off of him. And you want to just take a shower after you've been in the room with him. He is just that much of a terrible person. And more than willing to use that power to get what he wants. Again, regardless of consequence. And in this case, what he wanted was Talia. And as we see, he was willing to do what was necessary to get her. By his own admission, I wanted to do this without coercing you first, but now I'm just going to go ahead and coerce you. I don't have words. That's horrible. And it really shows how much some people are. In my opinion, it shows how to make my point clear. This is pure opinion, but it is my opinion that someone like Stoner was that horrible of a person before he got his empathic powers, and once he got his empathic powers, he can relax because now he can just be exactly how he wants to be, in every disgusting, slimy way possible. Now, this is relevant to the episode. Because someone like Stoner hides, he's overt and open and blatant and rude, and he is just completely at no point in time trying to hide the fact that he holds you in utter contempt. And yet he is at the same time more than willing to lie, deceive, manipulate, and control people, effectively full-on mind control people, just to make sure that he gets his way. This is a wonderful contrast to Timov, who is rude and overt and blunt and will tell you to your face how much she hates you. But she's not a bad person underneath all that. By her own words, again, even 20, I'm paraphrasing, even 20 years is not going to take away my moral center. I'm still going to save his life. I don't want to win this way. It feels wrong. So go ahead and save his life. Here's my blood transfusion. But I don't want him to know about it. Think about that. Think about how different of a person that is. She had power in that moment. Just like Stoner has power in his moment. Stoner chooses to use his power for his own selfish needs. She chooses to use power to help someone she hates. And that is a wonderful, beautiful way to contrast two individuals. Because if you just look at the surface, they're both just rude jackasses, right? It's when you dig a little deeper you see something more interesting like that. And I love the juxtaposition of the two. It also is a wonderful way to shine a light on the other two wives. Forgive me for not remembering their names because, frankly, they were disgusting people. But in all seriousness, the other two characters at first seemed like the other two wives. At first, they seemed like they were just ancillary, like no real purpose behind their existing. And yet, I realized as I was rewatching this episode, they serve the same purpose Stoner does. We see Timov, and we see the other two, and the other two are oozing all over Londo. And given what we already know about Centauri culture, what they're doing is correct. Timov is the outlier here, right? And she's presented as someone incredibly full of herself and incredibly rude. So it's slanted as if we're supposed to dislike her. Then we see Stoner, and we see how horrible someone like that can get under the wrong circumstances. Then we skip back to the three wives situation, and we start to see the other two in a new light. And we start to see that they are pretty much just as despicable as Stoner. When given the power to do something despicable and immoral, they did so without batting an eyelash. At no point in time did it even concern either of them, the one who actually attempted the assassination or the one who was, in my opinion, completely innocent of the assassination. At no point in time did either of them say, "Oh no," like any actual worry for Londo, any actual thinking that this is wrong. No moral center whatsoever. And so once again, we see two characters who are willing to ooze over the furniture, if you will, and are willing to do horrible things in order to get what they want. It's also really interesting to look at Londo's character in this episode. This is probably the happiest we've seen Londo in a long time. It's also fascinating to me, and very fitting with his character, that someone who is basically granted a wish from the Emperor of the Centauri. Keep in mind, at this point, Londo's star has already been on the rise. He is already moving up in circles. He already has significantly more political clout and economic might behind him than he ever did before, because of the whole deal with Mr. Morden, right? And the interactions of that. So he has moved up, and he is on the rise, and he has a personal favor from the Umbra. Anything you want. And he chooses a divorce. That says so much about Londo's character, and actually makes perfect sense when you really think about it. He has so many desires for pleasure of the women. I mean, we've seen this in the bars, right? In previous episodes, he was there with Lanier. Do you remember that? He has pleasures for drink. He has pleasures for money. He has pleasures for power. And yet, of all the things he could ask, when it came down to it, what he actually wanted was, in his own words, an easement. A removal of those wives from his life. And he had to keep one for functions and whatnot, but he could get rid of the other two. I cannot begin to put into words how much that says so much about his character. Because Londo is like Timov in many ways. When you shave away all that's on the surface, at that core, at least in my opinion, is a decent person. A moral person. Someone who, when handed power, doesn't want to use it for their own selfish purposes. I know that's going to cause some content, and I'm sure some of my viewers are going to disagree with me on that, but that's what I think on the matter. Furthermore, it also says a lot about Londo that he chooses Timov, keeping in mind he didn't know that she saved his life. He didn't know that. I don't think he ever finds out about that, actually. But despite that lack of information, he still chooses her. Because with you, I know where I stand. Because she was the one who was honest with him. He even points it out, flat out, while he's laying on the bed. Not a word of false encouragement. I'm paraphrasing, but each thing he says, no feigned concern, no false, pretenses, no fake blah, blah, blah. He's constantly trying to ask that, and she says, no, and I'm leaving. And he just is like, huh. And so he chooses her, and I think he chooses her for two big reasons. One, the professional reason. He is moving up in power, politically, and in terms of his affluence within the Centauri. The higher you are up in the circles, well, let me put it a different way. Let's say you're becoming politically powerful. Just picture it for a moment, okay? Now, let's say you have a choice between someone who will be your companion in this. Would you rather have someone who is willing to lie to you through their teeth and deceive you just to make sure that you hear what you want to hear? Or would you rather have someone who's going to be honest with you about how much they loathe you? Which is more useful professionally to ensure that they don't betray you, to ensure that they don't try to work with one of your rivals against you, to ensure that they're not looking out for their own interests against yours? Think about it for a moment. And of course, I think the second reason is personal preference. As we will see in the future, and as we have already seen in the past, and as is shown in this episode, Londo does actually have a preference for honesty. He can lie, and he has done so many times. But he does have a preference for honesty when it comes to his personal affairs. So her being blatant and honest with him is something that appeals to him at his core, underneath the politician. I haven't even had to look at my notes. All of this was just stuff off the top of my head. Delenn. We see it with Delenn in this episode. And it's funny because I mentioned this is a character building episode. It was a nice... This is like the 50th time I've brought this up. This is not padding, but a way to flesh out the character. Seeing Delenn having to deal with the utterly mundane reality that we're used to. I mean, we all have to deal with hair, right? You all have to deal with hair. And, you know, it's a normal thing to you, but Minbari don't have hair, and we just get a little bit of insight into the how the species works differently, and her learning how to deal with her hair not only leads to some it makes sense, is what I'm trying to say. It would be too easy for a writer to totally ignore that, to just say, oh yeah, she knows how to be part human now just fine. I like the more believable nature of her having to adjust to being part human, to trying to figure out how to be part human and try to interact with people and with her own body at this point. Also, the cramps thing at the end was obviously said as a joke. Well, I won't say anything else. It was really nice to see an actor in this episode. I'm going to horribly butcher his name. Forgive me. Carol Strukian. I'm going to try. Strukian. I'm probably saying that horribly wrong, which is a shame. He's the gentleman who played Mr. Holmes over in Next Generation. And he is the guy who played... oh my god, I can't think of his name also. The butler in the Addams Family. The Addams Family movies. It was nice seeing him here again. The moment I saw him, I'm like, Holmes! That's like first thing, Holmes! Oh my god. It was just nice seeing him again. That's really all I have to say about that. I really only have one last point to share about this episode, and that is, it is interestingly subtle, I suppose is the word I want to use. What's... Hang on just a second. Oh my god. Okay. I'll see how that looks on the replay. It's interestingly subtle how the assassin planned to get away with her plan. Flat out saying, oh, this gift is from me. I mention that because it throws off suspicion more than you'd probably think. Most assassins don't flat out say, this thing that's about to assassinate you is a gift from me. And in fact, considering she already had dealings with Mr. Stoner, it is extremely likely that she pretty much arranged this whole situation with Mr. Stoner so that suspicion would go towards him rather than on her, since, after all, he was already kind of an unlikable bastard. And, again, she flat out admitted, I am the one giving this assassination tool. I'm the one who gave the bomb to the person. It's me, here, this wasn't from me. It was a nice touch. I'm going to go check the edit on this and see if that audio is too bad, and I really hope I don't have to re-record it. I hate doing re-records. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.